In 2023, Cheruiyot Kirui made history as the first African to summit Manaslu, an 8,000-meter peak without supplemental oxygen. It was an achievement that should have satisfied most climbers for a lifetime, but for Cheruiyot, it was just the beginning. On May 22, 2024, this Kenyan banker was attempting something even more dangerous, becoming the first African to summit Mount Everest, the world's tallest mountain, without supplemental oxygen. He was found dead just 48 meters from making history. This is the story of when climbing Everest without oxygen goes catastrophically wrong. By day, Joshua Cheruiyot Kirui was a 40-year-old banker at Kenya Commercial Bank. Colleagues knew him as quiet, methodical, reliable, the kind of man who managed accounts with meticulous attention to detail. But they had no idea their soft-spoken coworker was secretly making mountaineering history. Born in Kenya's Rift Valley, the same region that produces the world's greatest marathon runners, Cheruiyot chose a different path to greatness. While his neighbors ran on flat ground, he was drawn to the vertical world. Growing up in a modest family, Cheruiyot was known for his quiet determination and methodical approach to everything he did. His friends describe him as someone who never did anything halfway, whether it was his studies, his banking career, or eventually, his climbing. He discovered mountaineering later than most serious climbers, not starting until his early 30s. What he lacked in early experience, he made up for with the same methodical approach he brought to banking. He studied every route, analyzed every risk, and prepared with obsessive detail. His climbing resume was extraordinary for someone who started late. He'd conquered Mount Kenya 15 times, mastering its technical routes and setting impressive speed records. On the Cheruiyot route, he achieved a remarkable time of 2 hours 56 minutes from Old Moses to Lenana summit. In one incredible feat, he climbed Mount Kenya 3 times in a single day, a testament to his exceptional fitness and determination. He summited Mount Stanley in Uganda's Rwenzori Mountains, a challenging 6-day expedition at 5,109 meters that showcased his ability to handle technical, multi-day climbs at altitude. He conquered Kilimanjaro multiple times, including speed climbs where he completed the ascent and descent in just 15 hours. But his breakthrough came in September 2023, when he achieved something no African had ever done. He summited Manaslu, the world's 8th highest peak at 8,163 meters, without supplemental oxygen. This made him the first African to conquer an 8,000-meter peak without oxygen, a historic achievement that should have made headlines worldwide. Instead, it passed almost unnoticed, even by his coworkers at the bank. He never boasted, never made it seem dangerous, recalled a family member. He just said he was going to the mountains like other people go to the office. This understated approach was typical of Cheruiyot. Even after summiting Manaslu, a historic achievement for African mountaineering, he barely mentioned it to coworkers. The accomplishment that should have made headlines in Kenya passed almost unnoticed. But privately, Cheruiyot was already planning something far more ambitious. He wanted to become the first African to summit Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen, a feat that would put him among the most elite mountaineers in history. His motivation went beyond personal achievement. He was driven by a desire to change how the world viewed African athletes, to prove that Africans could excel not just at running on flat ground, but at the highest levels of mountaineering. He was climbing with 7 Summit Treks, one of Nepal's established expedition companies, and had been assigned Nawang Sherpa as his guide. For a no-oxygen attempt, one of mountaineering's most dangerous pursuits, having an experienced guide is absolutely crucial. Experienced guides know when to turn back, how to recognize the subtle signs of altitude sickness, and how to manage the unique challenges of climbing without supplemental oxygen. They understand the delicate balance between pushing forward and knowing when retreat is the only option for survival. Climbing Everest is a major challenge, but doing so without supplemental oxygen pushes human limits to the extreme. The summit, at 8,848 meters, lies in the death zone, above 8,000 meters, where oxygen levels are about 1/3 of sea level. Without oxygen, the body rapidly deteriorates, risking hypoxia and impaired judgment. Fewer than 200 climbers have summited Everest without oxygen since 1953. These attempts have lower success rates and up to 3 times higher death rates than climbs using oxygen. No oxygen climbers move slower, spending more time exposed to frostbite, altitude sickness, edema, and exhaustion. Even experienced climbers suffer cognitive decline and poor coordination at this altitude. Weather is unpredictable and deadly. Rescue above 8,000 meters is nearly impossible due to altitude limits on helicopters and extreme conditions for rescuers. But for Cheruiyot Kirui, he trained and prepared as much as possible and believed he was ready to tackle this monumental challenge. Or so he thought. On May 22, 2024, Cheruiyot and Nawang were making their summit attempt from Camp 4 located at approximately 7,950 meters on the South Col. The weather conditions were favorable, clear skies and manageable winds that gave them hope for success. But climbing without oxygen means moving much slower than other climbers, spending far more time in the death zone where the human body cannot survive for long. While climbers using supplemental oxygen might complete the summit push in 6 to 8 hours, those without often need 12 to 15 hours or more. His heart would have been racing, trying to pump oxygen-depleted blood to vital organs. His muscles weren't getting enough oxygen to function efficiently. His brain, starved of oxygen, would have begun affecting his judgment and coordination, exactly when clear thinking was most critical. As they climbed higher through the night and into the morning, both men were pushing themselves beyond normal human limits. For Nawang, this was nothing new. He was a trained Sherpa ready for these environments. For Cheruiyot, it was his second time attempting such extreme altitude without oxygen support. Cheruiyot had always planned for emergencies. Before the climb, he wrote, "Nawang Sherpa will ferry an emergency bottle of oxygen to be used if I go lights out or if I go bananas. If I'm time-barred, unfavorable weather, body limit reached, when I realize I'm no Superman." But even with that plan in place, things began to unravel. As they neared the summit, Nawang made a final call from Bishop Rock at 8,810 meters, reporting that Cheruiyot had refused to turn back, even after briefly using supplemental oxygen, and was behaving abnormally. His voice suggested concern, but by then, they were deep in the death zone, where every decision carries life or death consequences. Why didn't Cheruiyot turn back? Experts point to several likely factors. At this altitude, extreme hypoxia can severely impair judgment and cause confusion, hallucinations, and poor decision-making. Witnesses in past no-oxygen ascents have described climbers zombie walking toward the summit, unable to process danger. Cheruiyot's refusal to descend, despite his deteriorating state, strongly suggests he was already suffering from altitude-induced cognitive decline. There was also the psychological grip of summit fever. After years of training, immense financial cost, and the knowledge that he was only meters from becoming the first Kenyan to summit Everest with no oxygen, the pressure to continue must have been overwhelming. Once that close, turning back can feel impossible, even when logic or survival demands it. Nawang's role in those final moments remains unclear. At such extreme altitude, guides often face an impossible balance between helping their client and preserving their own chance of survival. With both men exhausted and in the death zone, physical intervention would have been nearly impossible. Cheruiyot's brief use of supplemental oxygen may also have given him a false sense of stability, convincing him he could push the final meters to the summit despite clear danger. A rescue team was mobilized from Camp 4, racing against time to find the two climbers. But it was too late. Cheruiyot's body was discovered just 48 meters from the summit at 8,800 meters, closer to the top of the world than any African had ever been. He had fallen into a crevasse. Nawang Sherpa was never found. Both men perished on Everest, united by shared ambition and the mountain's unforgiving nature. The cruel irony was devastating. Cheruiyot had gone further than almost any climber without supplemental oxygen ever does, yet still couldn't complete the round trip safely. He had achieved something extraordinary, higher than any Kenyan in history, but paid with his life, just meters short of his dream. The mountaineering world was stunned by Cheruiyot's death. The loss of any climber is tragic, but the death of someone attempting such a historic achievement resonated throughout the climbing community. But the shock turned to outrage when the truth about Nawang emerged. It turned out that Nawang Sherpa had never summited Everest before. This shocking truth would only be discovered after both men were dead. And the revelation came through James Muhia, who had climbed with Cheruiyot previously and knew him well. After the tragedy, Muhia made the journey to visit Nawang's family to offer condolences from the Kirui family, a gesture of respect and shared grief between climbing families. It was quite unsettling to learn that Nawang had never been to the summit of Everest before guiding Cheruiyot, Muhia revealed in later interviews. The implications were staggering. A man on a no supplemental oxygen climb, one of the most dangerous types of climbs possible on Everest, had been assigned a guide with zero Everest experience. It was like assigning a student driver to navigate a Formula One race. According to Muhia, this wasn't just poor judgment, it was quite irresponsible. He continued, "Whereas we appreciate Nawang's dedication to his client and sticking with him, his situation might have been caused by his own inexperience." The climbing community was shocked by this revelation. How could an established expedition company make such a fundamental error in guide assignment? What oversight failures allowed this to happen? Expedition companies often assign Sherpa guides based on availability rather than strictly on prior summit experience, especially during the crowded Everest season. This practice aims to balance client demand and Sherpa workforce limitations, but can result in less experienced guides being placed in extremely high-risk roles. The company responsible for Cheruiyot's expedition reportedly did not disclose Nawang's lack of prior Everest summits to Cheruiyot or his team, raising ethical concerns about transparency and informed consent. This omission left Cheruiyot unknowingly exposed to a greater level of risk. The revelation about Nawang's inexperience reframed the tragedy entirely. What had first seemed like the inherent risk of high-altitude climbing now appeared to be a preventable disaster rooted in systemic negligence. James Muhia's discovery confirmed the harsh truth. Cheruiyot's no-oxygen bid had been supported by a guide who had never summited Everest himself. This raised serious concerns about oversight in the guiding industry and whether climbers are being misled about the experience of those assigned to keep them safe. It remains unclear whether Cheruiyot personally knew about Nawang's lack of Everest experience before the climb. Some insiders speculate that Cheruiyot trusted the expedition company's judgment and may not have been fully informed, highlighting a systemic problem where clients are not always given full disclosure about their guide's qualifications. The incident sparked tough questions within the mountaineering community. How could such a pairing even happen? Should there be minimum standards for guiding dangerous climbs like no oxygen attempts? And how many other climbers are unknowingly taking similar risks? Others defended both men, arguing that Nawang's dedication, staying with Cheruiyot until the end, showed the true spirit of mountaineering. His loyalty to his client, even unto death, embodied the best traditions of Sherpa culture and mountain guiding. But the fundamental question remained: should Cheruiyot have been told about his guide's inexperience? Should he have had the right to make an informed decision about whether to proceed with such a dangerous attempt? The answer seemed obvious to most in the climbing community. In the death zone, transparency isn't just ethical, it's a matter of life and death. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Cheruiyot's family faced an agonizing decision that no family should ever have to make. His body remained on the mountain, 48 meters from the summit, in one of the most dangerous and inaccessible places on Earth. Retrieving bodies from Everest's death zone is extraordinarily dangerous and expensive. It requires teams of experienced climbers to risk their own lives, often in conditions similar to those that killed the original climber. After extensive consultations with mountaineering experts, expedition companies, and among themselves, the family made a difficult choice. They would leave his body on Mount Everest. "The family has made the difficult decision to let his body remain on Mount Everest," read their official statement. "This decision was made after extensive consultations and careful consideration of all circumstances." They explained their reasoning with characteristic thoughtfulness. Cheruiyot fell into a crevasse 48 meters from the summit, and retrieving his body from that high up would be risky for the rescue team. The family does not wish to endanger any life. But their statement also revealed something deeper about their understanding of their son's passion. Cheruiyot had a profound love for the mountains, and they loved him in return. We find solace in knowing he rests in his happy place. The family also remembered Nawang Sherpa in their statement, showing the grace and compassion that characterized their response to the tragedy. We also pray for the family of Nawang Sherpa, Cheruiyot's Sherpa, during this expedition, who is yet to be found. May they find peace. Cheruiyot's death exposed critical flaws in commercial mountaineering beyond the tragedy of 2 lives lost on Everest. The revelation that Nawang Sherpa, his guide, lacked prior Everest summits raised urgent questions about transparency and accountability within expedition companies. The climbing community now demands clearer disclosure of guide qualifications and stricter standards, especially for high-risk no-oxygen climbs. The tragedy also highlighted the systemic pressures Sherpas face, carrying heavy physical and logistical burdens, while often accepting assignments beyond their experience due to economic and social constraints. Fear of losing work or damaging relationships can push Sherpas into dangerous roles, increasing risks when guides struggle to manage altitude illnesses and emergencies. Similar concerns surfaced after the 2019 Khumbu icefall tragedy, where 6 Sherpas died fixing ropes, renewing calls for better compensation, insurance, and working conditions. Sherpa fatalities often go unnoticed compared to climber deaths, despite their critical roles. Cheruiyot's death fits a broader pattern of fatal no-oxygen ascents, which carry higher risks. The 2006 solo, no-oxygen Everest attempt by British climber David Sharp, who died amid ethical debates over climbers' responsibilities in the death zone, similarly exposed the dangers of pushing human limits without adequate support. In Kenya, Cheruiyot's death was a profound loss for a growing mountaineering community. Seen as a pioneer elevating African climbing, his legacy inspires young climbers to pursue elite levels and motivates improvements in training, funding, and infrastructure across the continent. This tragedy continues to fuel vital conversations about safety, ethics, equity, and Sherpa welfare. Focus has sharpened on reforming expedition standards, enforcing guide certification, improving Sherpa working conditions and insurance, and urging climbers to honestly assess their experience and limits. While risk is inherent to mountaineering, greater transparency, preparation, and respect for Sherpas could reduce future tragedies. Cheruiyot Kirui and Nawang Sherpa's story stands as a caution and call to action, balancing ambition with responsibility and honoring both the dreamers who push human limits and the guides who risk their lives to help them.